This week's parsha, the Torah, teaches us im kesef talves ami es oni imoch. So Rashi immediately comments that this is one of the places, or three places, that the word im, which usually means if, here it means when. In other words, that the Torah is in favor of your lending money, of lending money to those who need it. Now, the nature of people is that we're not inclined to lend money because usually the people who borrow money are in danger of not being able to pay it back. So the Torah is talking about personal loans. We're not talking about commercial loans. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, I hope. But personal loans. Reuven comes over to Shimon. He says, I need $500 to tide me over. Lend it to me. So the Torah says you should lend it to him. However, the Torah is well aware of the problems involved here. So we find already, Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, Eved lovel ish malveh, that a borrower, so to speak, is a slave to the lender. So he's a slave, certainly psychologically. So, for instance, there's a halacha, it says, Lo siya lo kenosheh, you should not be like an oppressor to collect it from him. So there's a halacha that you're not allowed to, if you see him coming on your side of the street, you should cross the street so that he shouldn't see you, so he'll feel badly. Oh yeah, I owe him money. So that's a psychological avdus which exists. And then we find throughout the Gemara the concept of shalotino delis bifnei lovin, that in order to facilitate that people will lend money, the halacha makes it simpler to collect the money than it would be in ordinary cases. It gives rights of enforcement to the malveh that are not given, let's say, in ordinary cases of a dispute regarding money. Because the Torah wants shalotino delis bifnei lovin. And therefore, we have a few halachas that are involved here. For instance, the Shmitas Ksofim, which according to many applies even today, min Torah. So the halacha is that on the Shemitah year, the loans are canceled. And the Torah is aware that because of that, people will hesitate to lend money in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle because of the fact that people won't lend money because they know that if the lova just hangs on the 1 year, the loan will be canceled. So the Torah calls that dover blial. It's really an evil thing. It's to think that way. But the nature of people is that that's the way it is. And because of that, we have takana in the Gemara discussed in Gittin of prusbul, which is just a legal fiction. But the legal fiction exists because we want shalotino delis bifnei lovin, that people should lend the money. If people know that the Shemitah will cancel the debt, So then they'll say, I don't want to. So the principle is the fact that a private loan, the lender assigns it to the bet din, to the court. And according to the technical halacha, loans that are in the hands of bet din are not canceled on the Shemitah. They exist past the Shemitah as well. And therefore, this is already mentioned in the Mishnah. It's not a later takona, because of the fact that people did not want to lend money. Now, this opens up also the question of interest, of ribit. Because how do we view money? So that's the question, really the basic question, is money a commodity like gold and silver? So if it's a commodity, so I cannot borrow 1 bar of gold and have to pay you back 2 bars of gold. That's ribit midoraisa. That's the real ribit. But if money is seen only as a means of conducting business, it's not a commodity. For instance, if I have in my pocket a 50 shekel note, the piece of paper is not worth 50 shekel. It's worth 50 shekel because we have agreed as a society, as a government, as whatever we want to call it, that it represents 50 shekel. And therefore, it's not a commodity, it's a psychological agreement between us. Today we have, for instance, internet money, bitcoins, which is a step above already bills money. But it's again, we agree that that this represents this. And it's an attempt to get around the fact that every country has different currencies. So we're trying to make a universal currency that's not dependent upon where and how it's issued, where it exists. So the Jews in the Middle Ages, in Europe, in Western Europe, were in the money business. For various reasons, the Catholic Church at that time was of the opinion that they were the Jews. I've mentioned this a few times. They thought they're the real Jews. So since they're the real Jews, they cannot take interest from another Catholic, because the Bible says not to take interest if you look at it superficially. So, but it was impossible to exist in a developing economy without credit, without being able to borrow, which is what credit is. And it was impossible for credit to exist without interest. So how did they get around it? So they got around it by making the Jew the middleman. The duke or the count or the prince or the king lent money to the Jew, which he was entitled to, and the Jew agreed that he was going to pay kach v'kach interest, and then the Jew turns around and lends the money to other people, and he charges naturally a higher rate of interest. And the difference is his profit, and also we have to charge enough that if people renege on the loan, he should still be able to be solvent. So that's the spread. And that's exactly the spread that exists today. For instance, the Central Bank of Israel. So they say the interest rate is 2.75% now. So that's what they lend money at, to the banks. The bank will not lend you at 2.75. The bank will have to lend at more. And the more risky the loan, the greater the interest. So how do we get around that? So there's a whole discussion, I don't want to get into it, but there's a question of whether or not there's ribit d'Rabbanan. And yesterday I discussed with you avak lashon hara. There's also a din of avak ribit. Avak ribit extends to the fact that the borrower pays back. He should not say thank you to the lender, because that extra compliment is already avak ribit. So the Jews came up with a formula, and it was formalized in the 1500s by the Maram Lublin. So it applied mostly in Eastern Europe now, because then there were very few Jews in Western Europe. They'd been expelled, and Jewish, especially the Ashkenazi community, moved east. And that was called the heteriska. And heteriska meant that we take a loan. Now, all of this is based on the Gemara in Bamitzvah. There are two prokim in Bamitzvah, the fourth and fifth prokim, Hazov and Ezeu Neshech, which deal with these problems. We deal with the problems of the relative values of currencies and with the problems of interest. You have to realize that this is written 2,500 years ago. It's extremely sophisticated, not only for its time, but even for our time. And these are not easy prokim to study. And in most of the yeshivas, they are omitted, though to be studied privately. So anyway, the heter is based on these Gemaras. What it does is it converts a loan into a business arrangement, into a type of a partnership. In other words, I'm going to lend you $10,000, and you're going to use it to buy stock or to fix your house or to do something with it. So you agree that you'll pay me back $11,000, and I agree that that extra $1,000 is my share of the partnership, whatever amount of money you make. So it could be that by investing $10,000, your apartment is worth now $20,000 more. So I should be entitled to half of that, but we agreed that I'm entitled to what? To 1,000. And the same thing if it's not. We make a fixed agreement in advance, and therefore these loans are not considered loans, they're considered investments. That's the legal fiction here of the heteriska. So for instance, all the banks in Israel operate on a heteriska, and all the mortgages operate on a heteriska. So that became a legal loophole to be able to facilitate, and all of this is because of the fact shalotino delis b'fnei lovin. Because in order for society to exist, and in order for society to prosper, there has to be credit. And without credit, it can't exist. A cash society is not going anywhere. And because of that, therefore, all of this developed in halacha that we should be able to function, and that society should be able to grow and prosper and be creative. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Yisrael Leficha Chirba Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar Adonai Chavetz Leman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.
גדל והתקדש מאיר הבית, למען יברח חירותי והתברכותי ובכל עולם ובכל בכל בית ישראל, בהגלה ובזמן קריב, במקום המלך,
15 and a half.
Huh?
15 and a half. 16.
Whatever.
That's not recording.